My name is Emily Carter, and on the night of my 34th birthday, as I stood in my own living room, surrounded by people who were supposed to love me, my husband's hand came down across my face so hard that the taste of blood and chardonnay hit my tongue at the same time. I remember the clatter of the wine glass, the gasps, the frozen music. I remember the way his father leaned back in his chair, almost satisfied, as though he'd been waiting years for that moment to happen. And I remember the strangest thing of all, the way a low, almost eerie laugh slipped out of me before I even knew it was happening. The room fell silent. Someone whispered my name. Mark's face drained to a pale, sick gray. And that was the moment everything in my life began to split open. But to understand why a whisper could lead to a slap so violent it left a bruise across half my cheek, I need to take you back to the hours, no, the years leading up to that night. Because that birthday wasn't just a celebration. It was a pressure cooker, finally blowing its top in a quiet suburban home in Columbus, Ohio, where the neighbors kept their lawns neat, their secrets hidden, and their anger tucked behind polite hellos. That evening started beautifully enough. My friend Jenna had decorated our living room with simple string lights and white roses she'd picked up from the local Kroger. We had a potluck spread, deviled eggs, pulled pork sliders, a tray of brownies that my neighbor Mrs. Dalton insisted were low sugar, but absolutely weren't. The kind of casual, charming little gathering you see in small American neighborhoods on a Saturday night. Nothing fancy, nothing dramatic. Or so I thought. Mark was already tense when the guests arrived. His father, Charles, had shown up early, unannounced as usual, and immediately made himself at home by adjusting the thermostat, criticizing the curtains, and asking loudly why Mark hadn't upgraded that old grill out back yet. Charles had the kind of voice that made everything sound like a complaint, even a compliment, and he had a way of standing too close when he spoke, as if claiming territory. The man had never once approved of me, and he wasn't shy about it. I was too independent, too opinionated, not supportive enough of Mark's career, as if Mark's failed business ventures were somehow my fault. Still, I tried, really tried to keep the peace. For Mark, for the marriage I believed could still be saved. And so I smiled, thanked Charles for coming, and made sure someone handed him a plate before he started muttering about the food. The evening drifted along. People laughed. Someone put on old country music. The air smelled like barbecue sauce and birthday candles. And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself enjoy it. Maybe things could be normal tonight. Then Charles called Mark over. I remember seeing them in the corner near the mantel. Charles leaned in close, one hand cupped around his mouth, whispering something I couldn't hear. But I saw Mark's back stiffen, his shoulders tense, his jaw set hard enough to crack. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. It was my birthday. I wasn't going to let Charles poison it. But then Mark turned toward me, his face twisted into something I didn't recognize. Not anger, not grief, but a kind of desperate obedience. A look that said he was acting on command. He walked up to me. His hand shook once. Just once. And then it came down. The sound was sharp and wrong in the room, like a wooden board breaking. A few guests gasped. Someone dropped a fork. My cheek burned instantly, but my mind went strangely quiet. So quiet, I could hear the hum of the fridge in the kitchen, the clink of ice settling in glasses, the whisper of someone asking, "Oh my God, what just happened?" blood from my split lip mixed with the chardonnay still clinging to my tongue. And I laughed. I didn't plan it. I didn't even understand it. But something inside me snapped in the opposite direction of fear. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the final realization that this dynamic, this marriage, this control, this quiet erosion of who I was had reached its breaking point. Maybe it was the absurdity of seeing Mark look at me like a child who'd just knocked over a vase and expected his father to scold him. Whatever it was, that laugh changed the room more than the slap did. Charles went still. Mark turned white. Guests avoided looking at each other. And in that moment, a small, cold truth settled inside me. This wasn't about me at all. Whatever Charles had whispered was the fuse, and Mark was the firework. But the real explosion, the one that would change everything, had only just begun. I wiped the corner of my mouth with the back of my hand. My fingertips came away red. I stared at the color for a second, calm and strangely detached, then looked straight at Mark. What I asked softly, did he say to you? Mark swallowed, hard. His eyes flicked toward his father, like a frightened child seeking permission to speak. Charles's lips tightened, his jaw clenched, and I saw something shift behind his eyes, fear maybe, or the realization that he'd pushed too far. But no answer came. Not that night. Because instead of an explanation, the room dissolved into excuses. People rushed to me with napkins and apologies. Charles pretended to be concerned, urging Mark to take me upstairs to rest. Guests whispered their goodbyes, too quickly, eager to escape the discomfort. And Mark, my husband of 7 years, kept saying, "It wasn't what you think," without ever telling me what it actually was. Later, when the house was finally empty and the bruise on my cheek had blossomed into something dark and unmistakable, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the birthday cake no one had cut. The candles had melted down into wax puddles. The frosting looked wilted, and I felt something inside me harden. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg for truth. I wasn't even going to confront Charles, not yet. No, I was going to find out exactly what that whisper was. And then I was going to make sure neither of them ever forgot what happened after. Before I ever discovered what Charles whispered into Mark's ear that night, I had to untangle the pieces of a marriage and a family dynamic I had ignored for too long. And the truth is, the days after my birthday felt strangely calm on the surface, quiet, almost gentle, as if everyone involved hoped that silence would smooth everything over. But silence, I was starting to understand, was just another tool in Charles's toolbox, a way to bury things, a way to keep control. On Sunday morning, the bruise on my cheek had settled into a deep, purplish smear that couldn't be hidden by makeup, no matter how carefully I tried. Mark hovered in the doorway of our bedroom as I got dressed, opening and closing his hands, as though looking for the right words to say. But the words didn't come. They never did with him, not without someone else giving him permission first. "I'm sorry, Em," he finally whispered, voice barely above a breath. "It shouldn't have happened." I waited, hoping he'd continue, hoping he'd tell me what his father said. But when he didn't, I asked directly, "What did he whisper to you?" His eyes darted away. It wasn't what you think." "That's the second time you've said that," I replied, "and you still haven't told me what I'm supposed to think." He swallowed hard. "I need time." Time. He always needed time to decide, time to understand, time to process, time to ask his father. And I realized, standing there adjusting the cuff of my shirt, that time was what had allowed Charles to mold him into someone who couldn't make a decision without looking over his shoulder. We ate breakfast in silence. He left for work early, even though it was Sunday, and I found myself staring at the dirty plates, knowing deep down that the whisper had nothing to do with me being late to refill a drink or accidentally offending someone. It had weight, it had consequences, and I could feel it pulling at the threads of my life like a loose stitch. I wasn't going to wait for answers to fall into my lap. So I went to the one person who had lived long enough to recognize trouble before it had a name, Mrs. Dalton, my 71-year-old neighbor, who sat on her porch most mornings with a cup of coffee and a wisdom that came from surviving a husband's temper, 2 bankruptcies, and raising 4 kids on a LPN salary. When she spotted me stepping onto my porch, her eyes narrowed. "Come here, sweetheart," she called. "You look like you've been in a bar fight with a whiskey bottle." I tried to smile, but my cheek pulled painfully. "Birthday party," I said. Her eyebrow lifted. "Ah, family." I took a seat on her porch swing, told her everything, except the laugh. That part felt too strange to share too intimate something I still didn't fully understand myself. But she listened, nodding slowly, never interrupting. When I finished, she sighed, leaning back. That whisper, she said, wasn't about the moment. It was about leverage. Leverage, I repeated. Over what? Over you, over him, over something he's scared will come out. Men like your father-in-law don't act unless they're trying to hide something or force someone's hand. I thought of the way Charles looked at Mark after the slap, satisfied, smug, like he'd just proven a point. And if Mark reacted like that, she continued, it means Charles pushed a button he knows well. Something he's been pushing for years. Something your husband feels cornered by. I wrapped my arms around myself. I don't even know where to start. Mrs. Dalton drank her coffee, watching a pair of squirrels chase each other across her lawn. Start where women always start, she said. Follow the paperwork. That sentence stuck with me the rest of the day. By afternoon, I found myself going through Mark's suit jackets in our closet, more out of instinct than strategy. That's when I found it folded so neatly, it almost felt staged. A torn corner of a document. Smooth, crisp, official looking. A snippet of my name beside a partial signature. My signature. But I had never signed anything recently. Not with Mark, not with Charles, and certainly not anything that required my legal authorization. I looked at the handwriting, the curl of the letters, the downward stroke, a near-perfect imitation, but just slightly off. A forgery. My heart dropped, and I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the paper. This wasn't just a family whisper. This was a step toward something larger. Something that required my consent. Something someone wanted access to. Money, property, loans, lines of credit. A forged signature in a family like theirs wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. I folded the scrap carefully and put it into my wallet. Then I called the only attorney I trusted, my cousin's friend, someone who had helped me once with a workplace contract dispute. She agreed to meet Monday morning. That night, while Mark showered, I checked his phone. I didn't snoop often, I hated the feeling of it, but I needed clarity. Among the messages were several recent call logs from Charles. One in particular stood out, a 2-minute voicemail, left just 20 minutes before the party. When I pressed play, I didn't hear words. I heard a tone. Cold, firm, commanding. Mark, you will do what needs to be done tonight. Do you understand me? No specifics, nothing incriminating. But the threat was in the silence between sentences. I sat there on the edge of our bed, watching steam drift from the bathroom, realizing that Mark had been under his father's thumb far longer and far deeper than I understood. I put the phone back exactly where it had been. When Mark emerged, I pretended to be asleep, because whatever Charles had whispered, whatever he'd ordered, whatever he'd threatened, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. It was only the beginning. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that torn piece of paper with my forged signature, my name, trapped in someone else's plan. I saw Charles's face, that confident tilt of his chin, the way he stood back after the slap, like a man waiting to see whether his dominoes would fall the way he intended. And I saw Mark, shoulders hunched, shrinking into himself, unable to break away from a father who had spent decades molding him into something obedient, independent. By Monday morning, the bruise on my cheek had darkened to a plum-colored reminder of everything I still didn't know. I drove downtown to meet the attorney, Lydia Moore. Her office was in a modest brick building near the county courthouse, the kind of place older Americans instinctively trust. No glass towers, no receptionist in a designer dress, no talk of billable hours before you even sit down. When she saw my cheek, she paused. "I assume this ties into why you're here," she said gently. "I'm not here about the slap." "Not yet," I replied. "I'm here about this." I handed her the folded scrap of paper. She smoothed it out, her eyes narrowing as she leaned closer to inspect the handwriting. "That's not your signature," she said immediately. "No," I answered, "but someone wanted it to be." She let out a slow breath. "This looks like the corner of a loan agreement, maybe a credit line or refinancing document. Hard to tell without the rest of the page. But it's enough to know someone forged my name," I said. "Yes," she agreed, "and forgery isn't a mistake. It's a plan." She asked a series of questions. Had I recently signed anything with Mark? Had Charles pressured us about money? Had Mark mentioned financial trouble? I answered what I could. Lydia listened without judgment, only nodding slowly, like someone connecting dots on a puzzle she'd seen 100 times. Finally, she sat back in her chair. "Emily, I'm not trying to scare you, but I've handled cases where controlling family members tried to use a spouse's credit signature or assets to hide debt or secure loans. They couldn't qualify for themselves. If your father-in-law is involved and your husband is acting under his influence, you need to proceed carefully." Carefully. The word echoed in my mind like a warning. "What should I do first?" I asked. "Document everything," she said. "Dates, messages, the bruise, the voicemail, if you still have it. Keep records. Don't confront them directly, yet especially not Charles. And whatever you do, protect your accounts and credit reports immediately." She helped me place fraud alerts on my credit. She walked me through how to access recent inquiries. She gave me a checklist, simple, organized, methodical. The kind of advice older Americans appreciate because it's grounded, practical, no nonsense. By the time I walked out of her office, the cold January air hit me like a reminder. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't overreaction. This was real. When I got home, Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. He looked like a boy who'd been called to the principal's office and was bracing for punishment. "We need to talk," I said. He didn't look up. "I know." I sat across from him. "Then, tell me what your father whispered that made you—" "Emily, please," he interrupted, rubbing his temples. "I can't." "You can," I said more firmly than I expected. "And you will, because something bigger is going on, and I'm done pretending I don't see it." He flinched at the edge in my voice. But it wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. and for the first time in a long while, he seemed to recognize the difference. "What did he say?" I pressed again. His eyes finally lifted, watering a little. He told me that if I didn't do something to put you in your place, his words, he'd expose something that would ruin us both. Expose what? I asked. He shook his head helplessly. "I don't know. He just said he had proof that you'd signed off on a financial agreement, something with your name on it, and that if I didn't act, he'd go to the bank, the family, the police, whoever he needed to." I stared at him, the puzzle pieces clicking into place. "He used a forged signature to blackmail you." Mark nodded, shoulders collapsing inward. He kept saying it was my only chance to show authority and fix the marriage before it was too late. I didn't know what to do. I panicked. I reacted exactly how he wanted. I took a long, slow breath. Anger rose, hot, sharp, but underneath it was something heavier: grief. Grief for the man I married. The man who had once stood up for himself, now bent completely under his father's pressure. "Mark," I said, "do you understand that he's using you? That he's dragging you down with him?" He nodded miserably. "I know. I'm so sorry, Emily. I've always been afraid of him. He says, jump, and I do." "That stops now," I said quietly, "because I found part of that forged document, and I'm going to find the rest." His eyes widened. "You found it?" "In your pocket," I said. "Which means he gave it to you. Which means he wanted you to think I signed something I didn't." Mark swallowed again this time, not out of fear, but out of realization. "What are you going to do?" he whispered. "I'm going to protect myself," I said, "and I'm going to uncover every piece of whatever your father is hiding." I stood up, and Mark reached out, grabbing my wrist gently, not to stop me, but to steady himself. "Emily, please don't give up on me," he said quietly. I looked down at him. For a long moment, I saw not the man who slapped me, but the man who had been slapped emotionally by his father for decades. "I'm not giving up," I said, "but I'm not standing still either." That afternoon, I drove across town to Charles's hardware store. I didn't go inside. I didn't confront him. I simply sat in the parking lot, watching. Employees moved quickly when he barked orders. A young cashier flinched when he slammed a clipboard down on the counter. Customers avoided his eyes, as though they already knew better than to ask too many questions. This wasn't a man with confidence. This was a man with control, and control slipping through his fingers. I jotted down what I saw: times, reactions, tone, everything. Because Lydia was right, documentation mattered. When I returned home, I found another piece of evidence. I hadn't expected Mark's mother, Linda, standing on our porch, wringing her hands. "I heard what happened," she whispered, eyes red. "I'm not here to defend him. I'm here because you deserve to know the truth." I stepped aside, letting her in. She held a folder, thick, worn, bulging with papers. "This," she said, setting it on the table, "is everything Charles has been hiding, and you're the only one strong enough to stop him now." My heart pounded as I opened it, because whatever I was about to read wasn't just information. It was a roadmap to a truth Charles never wanted me to find. Linda's hands trembled as she pushed the thick folder toward me, the edges frayed as though it had been opened and closed 100 times by someone too frightened to let it out of her sight. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared at it, at the sheer weight of it, at the years it seemed to represent. A lifetime of secrets shoved into a manila shell. Linda's eyes were red, swollen, the eyes of a woman who had spent decades choosing the quieter pain just to keep peace in a house that never truly had any. "I should have brought this to you years ago," she whispered. "But I was scared. I'm still scared." I nodded slowly, my voice gentle. "Then, why bring it now?" "Because the moment I heard what he did to you, and what he forced Mark to do, I realized Charles isn't just hurting us anymore. He's trying to destroy everything he can't control." She swallowed. "And you're the only one he can't control." Her words unsettled me, not because they were untrue, but because they were true in a way I hadn't realized until that moment. I had always thought Charles disliked me, disapproved of me. But this wasn't simple disapproval. This was fear of anyone who didn't bend. And I had never bent. I finally opened the folder. The smell of old paper filled the kitchen, the scent of bank envelopes, photocopied documents, handwritten notes, receipts from years I didn't recognize. I lifted the top sheet, a loan application from 5 years ago, filed under Mark's name, but with income numbers that weren't even close to accurate. Behind it was another document, this one a credit line Charles had co-signed for Mark without Linda's knowledge. Then another, an insurance policy, with Mark listed as the primary beneficiary, but with a suspicious note scribbled at the top in Charles's handwriting, "Keep this quiet." I kept flipping. Page after page of financial manipulation, shameful debt, accounts opened, closed, reopened. And then halfway through the folder, I found the rest of the loan form, the one with my forged signature. The part I held in my wallet was a corner. This was the whole bottom half. My name, my address, my supposed consent, and the signature close enough to be believable, wrong enough, that I felt sick just looking at it. "He forged this," I whispered. Linda nodded, tears spilling. "He forged plenty, but this one scared me, because he never forged a daughter-in-law's name before." My pulse thudded in my ears. Why would he do this? Why drag me into his mess? She clasped her hands, twisting them miserably. "Because he's drowning, financially. The store barely breaks even anymore. He's taken out loan after loan, and he's running out of people he can use. He thinks if he ties you to something, anything, he can control Mark forever. And if Mark resists, he'll say it's your fault. He always finds a way to blame someone." I set the document aside. Mark didn't know about any of this. She shook her head firmly. "No, he only knows the pieces Charles lets him see. And those are always the pieces that make your husband feel weak." My jaw tightened. That line sat heavy in the air, because it was painfully precisely true. Mark didn't hit me because he wanted to. He hit me because he was drowning in a lifetime of being told he wasn't enough. His father whispered something that pushed the right fear, and Mark reacted like a boy trying to earn approval he was never going to get. "Linda," I said softly, "why bring this to me now?" She drew a shaky breath. "Because I heard what happened at the party, and I heard the way you laughed." She paused. "Do you know what it reminded me of?" I shook my head. The moment a woman finally knows the truth. Every woman has that moment. The house can be burning, but the calm inside her, that's something no one can take away from her again. A chill slid down my spine. I didn't feel strong. I felt tired. I felt bruised. I felt betrayed. But there was something else underneath all of that clarity. "This isn't just money," I whispered. "No," she said. "This is control, and he's losing it." I sifted deeper into the folder. Toward the back, I found a sheet torn from a legal pad, a page covered in Charles's handwriting. Plans, notes, lists, and a line underlined 3 times. "Get Mark to act. Emily listens when he takes the lead." My skin crawled. Emily, Linda whispered voice. tightening. I'm not here to ask you to save my son. I'm here because you deserve to know exactly what you're up against. I looked at her, this woman who had spent decades living with a man who hollowed her out piece by piece, and felt something soften in my chest. "Does Mark know you're here?" I asked. "No," she whispered, "but he will, and when he finds out, he'll either break free or he won't." We sat in silence, two women bound by different chapters of the same story. When Linda finally stood to leave, she touched my hand gently. "Be smart. Be patient. Don't challenge him head on. That's what he expects. Men like Charles only understand two things: exposure and consequences." I nodded. After she left, I spread the documents across the dining table. Rows and rows of secrets staring back at me. Evidence, proof, a map of how Charles had manipulated not just his finances, but his family. My family. I took out my phone and started photographing everything: front, back margins, timestamps. I saved the images in 3 different folders. One on my phone, one on a password-protected cloud drive, one on an external flash drive I tucked into an old recipe box Linda had given me years ago. Then I made a list. Every lie, every debt, every forged signature, every time Charles bullied Mark verbally or financially, every message, voicemail, and threat. I didn't write it with anger. I wrote it with precision. Because this wasn't revenge, born of rage. This was protection, born of clarity. When Mark came home that evening, his eyes were swollen from crying. He sat beside me at the table, staring at the papers spread before us. He didn't speak at first. He just looked, really looked. And for the first time, I saw something change in him. Something unshackled. "Emily," he whispered, voice thick, "what do we do now?" I closed the folder gently. "We move carefully," I said. "Piece by piece, step by step, we protect ourselves, and we show your father that he can't bury what he's done anymore." Mark nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. Then he whispered the words I never thought I'd hear. "I'm ready." The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The winter light was pale, barely pushing through the blinds, but my mind was already sharp awake, steady. There was no panic, no trembling, no replay of the slap in my head. It was strange, almost unsettling, how calm I felt, as if some internal switch had flipped the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with a family disagreement, but with a decades-long pattern of manipulation that had finally come into the light. Mark came downstairs a few minutes later, still in sweatpants, his hair uncombed, his face drawn. He looked older than 36, tired, used, as if his father had carved lines into him that didn't belong on a man his age. He sat across from me. "I meant what I said last night," he murmured. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes." I studied him for a moment. "Whatever it takes includes telling the truth," I said quietly. "All of it, even the parts that make you look weak." "I know," he whispered. "I'm done hiding." That was when I realized something important. This wasn't just my reckoning. It was his, too. We spent the next hour going through the folder again. Every document, every forged signature, every lie. I watched Mark's face shift from confusion to disbelief to anger, and finally to a deep, quiet sorrow. He wasn't angry at me. He wasn't even angry at himself. He was angry at the years he had lost to a man who never once taught him how to stand on his own. "We need proof," I said. "Real proof. Not speculation, not stories, evidence." Mark nodded. "We can get it. He saves everything. always has. That was true. Charles was the kind of man who kept boxes of old receipts just in case. He hoarded paperwork like other men hoarded trophies. But he also guarded his files with suspicion, keeping them stacked in a locked cabinet in the back office of the hardware store. "Do you know where he keeps the key?" I asked. Mark nodded slowly. Yes. That answer carried weight. Not cowardly weight, knowledge, weight. The kind that comes from growing up under someone who tracked every dime, every decision, every mistake. We formed a plan. A careful, quiet, step-by-step plan. Nothing rash, nothing emotional, nothing that could be twisted or blamed on anything but the truth. But first, we needed one more piece of information. So that afternoon, I drove back to the hardware store, not to confront Charles, but to observe, to watch, to understand the world he ruled like a king whose crown was slipping. From my car, I saw him berate an employee for mislabeling a box of screws. He slammed the box on the counter, shouting loudly enough that 2 customers walked out. His voice carried sharp and venomous through the glass. But something was wrong. He wasn't confident. He was frantic. His hands shook slightly when he grabbed a clipboard. His eyes darted around the store like he was searching for threats. He was a man unraveling. I watched the way he looked over his shoulder, as though worried someone might be watching him. Because someone was. When he disappeared into the office, I rolled down my window to hear better. Through the thin glass door, I heard drawers opening and closing, papers shuffling, a muttered curse, another drawer slamming, then hurried footsteps. He came out stiffly, locked the office door, and marched back to the front of the store. He was hiding something, and the timing was too perfect for coincidence. I wasn't the only one who noticed. As I watched from the car, Mrs. Dalton's son, who sometimes did handyman work for Charles, stepped out of his pickup truck. He walked in with a friendly wave, a wave Charles ignored. I made a mental note. Anyone Charles avoided or feared might be an unexpected ally later. That evening, Mark and I sat at the kitchen table again, the folder between us. "He's panicking," I said. "Something's shifting." Mark nodded. He knows the slap caused a crack, and cracks spread. But the biggest shift came right before dinner. Someone shoved a letter through our mail slot. No envelope, no signature, just a folded sheet of printer paper. Inside were 5 words typed in bold. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." Mark stared at it, hands trembling. "It's him," he whispered. "It has to be." "No," I said, slowly studying the page. "If it were him, he'd want credit, control. Fear works best when the source is clear." Mark's forehead creased. "Then who?" "Someone covering their tracks," I said. "Or someone desperate." We both looked toward the folder. Because the deeper we dug, the more dangerous the truth became for whoever was attached to those documents. In the early hours of the next morning, long before sunrise, Mark woke me gently. "I can get into his office today," he whispered. "He's going to the supplier warehouse in Dayton at noon. He'll be gone for at least 2 hours. The manager takes lunch at 12:15. The office will be empty." I sat up fully awake. "Can you get the key?" I asked. He nodded. "I know where he hides the spare." It was risky, yes, but not illegal, not when gathering evidence of fraud manipulation or threats connected to forged documents bearing my name. And certainly not illegal for Mark to access the back office of his own family's business, where he'd worked on and off for years. We laid out the plan like 2 people who had spent years being underestimated. Mark would retrieve financial statements, contracts, loan documents. and anything bearing my signature or his. I would stay home and prepare copies of everything from the folder. Lydia would receive all documents the moment we had them, and we would keep records of every step. At 11:52 a.m., Mark texted me a single word. Inside. At 11:59. Found the cabinet. There are 6 folders, all thick. At 12:07. Taking photos now. You won't believe this. My heart pounded as I waited staring at my phone. At 12:23. We have him. We have everything. When Mark walked through the front door, an hour later, his face was pale, shaken, but determined. He placed a stack of printed photos and a thumb drive onto the table. "Emily," he said, voice trembling, "he forged your name on more than one document, and there are things he hid from me, things he used to manipulate me." I touched his hand. "We'll go through them together." He nodded, sinking into the chair beside me. But before we could open the first photo, someone pounded on the front door, furious, loud, demanding. Mark froze. We both knew that knock. "Charles." I stood slowly. Mark grabbed my wrist, not to stop me, but as if needing reassurance. "Emily," he whispered, "don't open it." But I did, because it was time. He stood there on my porch face, red with rage, breathing hard, like he had sprinted across the yard. "What did you do?" he hissed. Behind me on the table, the folder sat open, like a truth he had spent years trying to bury. I met his gaze steadily. "Charles Atan," I said, my voice calm, almost soft. "It's over." Charles didn't step inside right away. He stood on the porch, like a man hit by a wind he didn't see coming, jaw clenched, chest, heaving eyes darting over my shoulder, as if he could scan the house for incriminating shadows. His face was a mottled red, the kind that comes from fury and fear mixing together in equal measure. And for the first time since I'd known him, he didn't look in control. He looked cornered. "Move," he snapped, trying to shoulder past me. I didn't move an inch. "That's not happening," I said quietly. His nostrils flared. "This is between me and my son." "No," I said. "This is between you and the truth." Mark appeared behind me, pale and tense, but standing tall for once. "Dad," he said shakily, "you need to leave." Charles shoved past me, then storming into the entryway like he owned the place. "What did you take?" he barked. "What did she make you steal?" Nothing, Mark said, but his voice trembled. Charles's eyes snapped to mine. "You think you can turn my son against me? You think you can poison him? He's my blood. He knows who protects him." "Protects," I echoed. "Is that what you call forging my signature? Blackmailing your own son? Threatening us? That's not protection, Charles. That's control." His face went white with a flash of something, panic guilt or rage, I couldn't tell. Maybe all three. "You don't know anything," he spat. "You think digging through paperwork makes you smart. You don't know what you're talking about." But he was wrong. I knew everything, and he knew I knew. I gestured toward the dining table, where the folder lay open, his secrets, illuminated in the soft afternoon light. "You've been hiding this for years," I said, "using Mark's name, my credit, your wife's silence. But the pattern is clear." Charles's eyes narrowed as he approached the table. He grabbed a few pages and scanned them. His expression flickered recognition, then fear, then pure, venomous anger. "Where did you get these?" he demanded. "Who gave you access to my—" "Your lies," I supplied. "Your debts, your forged documents, your blackmail notes. It doesn't matter where I got them, Charles. What matters is they're real." He slammed his fist onto the table hard enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall. "You're destroying my family." "No," I said softly. "You did that." He spun toward Mark, his voice tight with desperation. "Son, listen to me. She's manipulating you. She wants to turn you against your own father. I have protected you your entire life." Mark took a step back, shaking his head. "No, Dad. You've controlled me my entire life. I see that now." The words hung in the air like a crack in old concrete. Charles blinked once slowly, as if he couldn't believe his son finally spoke those words aloud. "You ungrateful," he began, but I cut him off. "Charles," I said calmly, "we have everything, and the bank will too soon." His head whipped back toward me. "You wouldn't dare." I met his glare without flinching. "Try me." He opened his mouth to respond, but Mark stepped in front of me, blocking his father's line of sight. "Dad," Mark said quietly, but firmly, "you're not going to talk to her that way." Charles stared at his son with an expression that was almost uncomprehending. "You're choosing her over me." Mark's jaw tightened. "I'm choosing the truth." Silence. For the first time, Charles seemed unsure of himself. His bravado faltered. His posture slumped slightly, as if a weight he'd carried for decades suddenly shifted. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, but not kinder. "You don't know what you're doing," he muttered. "This will ruin everything." "No," I said, "this will fix everything, because the lies end here." He shook his head, backing toward the door. "You two are children. Stupid, naive children. You think the bank cares about your little stories? You think anyone will believe you over me?" I stepped closer, holding up my phone. "I think the bank will care about recordings." He froze. The color drained from his face. Yes, Mark and I had recorded this confrontation. Lydia told us to document everything, and this counted. "You tricked me," he breathed. "No," I said. "We prepared. There's a difference." He let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. "You think this is over? This is far from—" But he didn't finish. Behind him on the porch stood two people, Linda and Mrs. Dalton. Linda's eyes were swollen, her expression trembling between sorrow and courage. Mrs. Dalton stood by her side, like a sentinel, arms folded, jaw set, her presence radiating the kind of steady strength only older women truly possess. Linda stepped forward. "Charles, it's time." His face twisted. "You," he hissed, "you betrayed me." "No," she said wearily. "I finally stopped betraying myself." He glared at her, at me, at Mark, at the folder, at everything he could no longer control. Then his gaze went cold, hard, and empty. "You'll regret this," he whispered. Linda took a shaky breath. "Maybe, but not as much as I've regretted staying silent." The weight of her words crushed the rest of the anger out of him. He left without another sound. We watched from the doorway as he walked stiffly to his truck, climbed in, and drove away. When the engine faded, the house fell quiet. Too quiet. A quiet that felt like the aftermath of a storm, debris everywhere. Nothing where it belonged, but air finally safe to breathe again. Mark leaned heavily against the wall, breath hitching. "It's really happening," he whispered. "He's really losing control." "No," I said softly. "He already lost it. He just finally realized it." Mrs. Dalton gave a hard nod, her voice steady as stone. "Now comes the real work. You got proof. You got witnesses. You got leverage. But you also got to stay smart. Men like him don't walk away quietly." She was right. Charles wasn't done, but neither were we. That night, after Linda and Mrs. Dalton left, and after Mark fell asleep on the couch From sheer exhaustion, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the open folder. Tomorrow, the real consequences would begin. For him, for us, for everything he'd tried so hard to bury. And I knew deep in my bones that the next step wasn't revenge. It was revelation. The morning after Charles stormed out of our house, the sky over Columbus was washed in a winter gray that seemed to match the heaviness settling into my chest. Not dread, no, something more like anticipation. The sense that a chapter long overdue was finally ready to close, but only if I found the courage to turn the last pages myself. Mark was still asleep on the couch, curled in on himself, exhausted from everything that had unraveled. His breathing was deep, steady, but each rise and fall of his chest seemed to carry years of unspoken fear. Fear of disappointing his father, fear of standing alone, fear of breaking a cycle he had never even fully realized he was trapped in. I watched him for a moment, feeling both sorrow and something close to relief, because broken things can be mended, but only if they're finally allowed to break. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the folder open in front of me. I knew what had to be done. Lydia would file the fraud reports today. The bank would be notified. The documents would be reviewed. But this last part, the part that mattered most, was something only we as a family could do. It was time to bring the truth into the light, fully, publicly. Not with a dramatic explosion, but with a kind of steady, unshakable transparency that Charles had always relied on others never having. By late morning, Mark woke up and joined me at the table. His eyes were swollen, but calmer than I expected. "What happens now?" he asked, voice quiet but steady. "Now," I said, "we face him, with witnesses, with boundaries, with truth." He swallowed. "He won't come willingly." "He will," I said. "He wants control too much to ignore an opportunity to defend himself." Mark nodded slowly. "Mom should be there." "Yes," I agreed. "And someone neutral too. Someone outside the family who understands situations like this." He looked at me closely. "You mean Mrs. Dalton?" Of course I did. Older Americans know how to sit through confrontation without flinching. They know how to hold their ground without theatrics. They know when to speak and when silence carries more weight. And Mrs. Dalton had lived through her own storm long before ours began. We invited both Linda and Mrs. Dalton over that afternoon. The four of us sat in the living room, the air thick but not tense, more like a waiting room before a verdict that everyone already knew but hadn't said aloud. Linda held her hands tightly in her lap. "Are you sure about this?" she asked me. "Yes," I said, "because we're not doing this to destroy him. We're doing this so he stops destroying us." Mrs. Dalton nodded approvingly. "Families don't heal from secrets. They heal from sunshine." Mark gave a small, grateful smile. "Thank you for coming," he told both women. At exactly 4:00 p.m., Charles's truck pulled into the driveway. He got out slowly. His face was tight, unreadable. His posture stiff, as though bracing for a fight he still believed he could win. When he stepped into the living room, he froze. He hadn't expected witnesses. He hadn't expected his wife sitting beside me. He hadn't expected Mrs. Dalton, arms crossed, gaze steady, watching him with the kind of no-nonsense stare only older women can deliver. For the first time, he seemed unsure of himself. "What is this?" he demanded. "This," I said, "is the truth. And you will listen. You don't get to bully or interrupt. You don't get to twist this. You're going to hear what your actions have done, and then we're going to set boundaries you can't step over again." His eyes narrowed. "Boundaries. You think you can tell me "Sit," Mrs. Dalton said sharply. And he did. Linda's eyes filled with tears at the sight her husband obeying another woman's command for the first time in decades. Silence settled over the room. Mark spoke first. "Dad," he said, voice trembling, but determined, "you've controlled me my whole life. You made me believe I wasn't good enough unless I did exactly what you wanted. You used money, guilt, threats, everything you could to keep me tied to you." Charles stiffened. "I raised you. I supported you. You'd have nothing without me." "No," Mark said firmly. "I would have a backbone. I would have confidence. I would have a life that wasn't built around trying to make you proud." For a moment, Charles looked punched in the gut. Linda spoke next, voice soft but steady. "Charles, you've hurt this family. You've hurt our son. And you forged Emily's name. You risked our home, our finances, everything." His face tightened, but he didn't deny it. That was telling. "I spoke last, not with anger, not with venom, but with clarity. You hurt me too, not just the slap at my birthday party. That was just the moment everything snapped. You manipulated my husband into hurting me. You threatened us. You forged my name to control us. That ends now." Charles's breathing grew uneven. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "No," I said. "For once it's being seen in proportion." He tried to stand, but Mrs. Dalton raised a hand. "Sit," she said again. He obeyed. "This family," she said, "is tired. Tired of being pushed. Tired of being scared. Tired of letting you run the show because you shout the loudest. You're not the strongest man in this room. You're the loneliest." Charles's eyes flickered in pain. Mrs. Dalton continued, voice softening. "It's not too late for you to change, but you can't change what you won't admit." Silence again. Finally, Charles looked at Mark, not with rage, not with superiority, but with something hollow, something defeated. "I was trying to protect you," he muttered. "No," Mark said. "You were trying to protect your power." Then Charles's shoulders finally dropped, sagging under the weight of years he could no longer pretend weren't there. "What do you want from me?" he asked, voice cracking ever so slightly. I took a breath. Truth, accountability, and distance. His head lifted slowly. "Distance." "Yes," I said. "You will not come to our house unannounced. You will not threaten or manipulate. You will not access our finances or make decisions for Mark. And you will show respect, or you will stay away." Linda added, her voice trembling but resolute. "And Charles, I need space too, a lot of it." For the first time, he looked genuinely shaken. And then something remarkable happened. He nodded. It wasn't acceptance, not fully, but it was a beginning. A crack in the armor, a sliver of willingness. He stood slowly, eyes unfocused, then walked to the front door without another word. When it closed behind him, the room felt lighter. Exhausted, but lighter. Mark collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Linda cried, softly. Mrs. Dalton exhaled deeply, as though letting go of years that weren't even hers to carry. And I felt something loosen inside me, a knot untying. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the possibility of peace. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, and the house had gone quiet, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the folder finally closed. This was no longer about revenge. It was about healing, about boundaries, about choosing what kind of future we wanted. Not one defined by fear, but by truth and courage. I recorded my final message for the audio story, one meant for listeners older than 60 who had lived enough life to know that families are complicated, healing is messy, and silence can be both a shield and a weapon. I spoke softly. Sometimes the loudest battles happen behind closed doors. Sometimes the hardest truths hide in plain sight. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say, enough, and choose peace with boundaries. If this story touched, you share it with someone who needs courage today. And if you want more stories like this, stories of quiet, strength of justice, in silence, subscribe. And stay with me. We walk this road together. I clicked the recorder off. And just like that, the storm finally settled.